All right, welcome to chapter 2 of Classic Suspense. We have changed the name. I think we did call it like Reimagining Suspense or something like that. We changed it to Buckle Up, and we hope you agree that
Yeah,
that was a good
we're
decision
assholes.
because buckle up. And I will say buckle up for this because I think this is going to be, uh, well, a fun presentation, a firecracker. We're not going to
We
have
had fun
anybody.
putting this together.
We did.
Definitely.
We did. We did not drive any trucks, but yeah. So ground rules. We covered these last week. Um, Violators will get cursed out by Hurricane Billy Friedkin. So I'm just going to read this. This is an interview with Friedkin and MovieWeb. We don't know how long these DVDs or Blu-rays will last. MovieWeb, according to Oliver Stone, they are only supposed to last 10 years. Friedkin, how the fuck does he know? MovieWeb, I don't know, but I think that's pretty funny. Seriously, 10 years is what he said. Friedkin, he's full of shit. Has anybody been able to prove that? Where's the proof? I have DVDs that are 10 years old now. I have DVDs from 1999 or 98. They still work fine. How does he know they last 10 years? MovieWeb. I think at the time he said that he didn't want people to buy Alexander on DVD. Friedkin, fuck him and Alexander. I don't know if I did that in a Friedkin voice or not, but by accentuating. But Friedkin is a colorful character, well, language-wise. I guess, personally, I think he was not extremely colorful, but yeah. Anyway,
He's not
there,
cryptic. He's not
yeah,
cryptic.
he's
You're
pretty
not gonna get
straightforward.
you're not gonna get like a David Lynch style answer for him. He's gonna
He's a
answer and
straight shooter. Yeah.
he's a definite straight shooter. So
So all the rules apply. There will be a little bit of politics in the context of the films this week because just that's the way it works. We have a very political, well, a couple of very political individuals. So we'll start out with Wages of Fear, 1953. I don't know, Christina, if you want to help, but I'm not even going to try the French title, but Pure. Uh, yeah. Anyway,
Les, les salaires de la peur. Let me put my high
that's
school
pretty good.
friend.
That's pretty good. The
that
thing is,
was
I have high
quite
school
good.
French, and I'm worthless. But anyway, I love this scene, the shot too. This is the same shot as the Criterion cover. We already talked about Henri-Georges Clouzot last week. We'll just say that he is the quote other master of suspense. He's been called the French Hitchcock, which I don't know if that's really fair, but Hitchcock has actually commented on Clouseau as well, and showed his admiration, but not everybody did, as we'll get into. But we won't recover Clouseau because we covered him quite a bit last week, and so here's where Yves Montand as Mario. And by the way, for people listening or watching, well, I guess watching, you're watching, but people listening, you're not going to see the slides, but there is a lovely picture of Yves Montand and as Mario. He's driving in a car with Edith Piaf. Don't worry, everybody on the call, I will not describe every image, but he was discovered by her. I have a feeling it was a little more than just a discovery. I don't want to well, I'm not going to say anything about Edith Piaf. She's the Sparrow, love her, but she's an interesting character as well. Yves Montand is massive and was massive in France. Probably, even though he's passed, still is one of the greatest stars. And not just his stardom transcended film. So he was very political. So here he worked with numerous directors, lots of roles. Casagares, which will come into play a little bit with Sorcerer. He was in The Confession. I think that might have been it. Claude Berry, of course, the double feature or the two films in the 80s. Marcel Carnet, lots more, but famously political. This is actually probably the only time we'll source from a actual socialist website, a propaganda. I don't know if it's propaganda. I didn't really vet it out, but it's Workers' Liberty, and it talks about it's really chronicling Montand's leftist history, and he really was a legit socialist. He was fond of Stalin for a long, long time, and it documents or discusses when he realized what Stalin was really about, and when he kind of went a different direction. But yeah, I don't believe he ever actually ran for political office, although he was always kind of discussed, even around the time when he made something like The Confession. I think his name was touted as a political figure. And I know that in 1984, the France was polled, and 44% of the populace wanted him to run for office. So that's a lot of people for an actor. Of course, we had an actor for president in America too, and he won a lot more than 44%. So you never
Listen,
know.
I'd vote for him just for being fucking fine. You know what I mean?
Is so
I mean,
that's the platform that okay. He's light on the eyes. I will not disagree with you, Joe Blake. So, speaking of light on the eyes, last week we saw Vera Clouzot in her second role. This is her first role, and it is very, very different. I actually asked um, Jill earlier today if like this image was scandalous because there's a little bit of cleavage going on, but and Jill was like, "Oh," and I said, "There's no nip," and you were like, "I don't care if there is nip." Is that right? Like get
yeah,
Jill
that's
right?
right. Put it in there. I think she's gorgeous in this. It's a gorgeous image, and the camera loves her, and the man behind the camera loved her. So yeah, put it in
Yes.
there. I love it.
This is where the male gaze was a little more than male gaze. You can tell that he certainly loved his wife in this movie. And I think the character really is quite a contrast from the other characters, especially Mario, as we'll see. Of course, you saw the cross-cutting of her dancing at the end of the movie, and we'll get into that here shortly. There are other people. Charles Vanel, I believe. So he actually is, yeah, he was a notable actor early in his career uh, in the 30s. Fell out of favor, and he had worked with Raymond Bernard. So he was in, if you know Bernard, did a lot of big work in the 30s. So probably the best, in my opinion, the best Les Miserables. Also, Wooden Crosses, a couple others. Jacques Fader is another. These are all kind of most people might consider them obscure French directors, but they weren't obscure at the time. Julien Duvivier is somebody also. He was in a movie called They Were Five, which I think was 1935, which actually was a very leftist, socialist kind of movie. So I don't know his personal politics, but he was very good in that movie. But yeah, this was during the war, so of course or I'm sorry, this is after the war. So a lot of time had passed since that heyday. And I didn't talk about the other cast. I mean, this film doesn't really use the cast that well. I wanted to talk about the cinematographer because we didn't get to highlight him as much last week. Armand Thurand. Now, I think it was mentioned that he might have worked on The Passion of Joan of Arc. I couldn't find that, but it's possible. But he had worked with a number of filmmakers. So Roger Vadim actually post-war. So I'm actually not a huge fan of Vadim, but a lot of people are. And I think he had worked on one Carnet film. I believe it's Gates of the Night. Um, did not work with the French New Wave directors, and so his career pretty much fell on it. I shouldn't say fell on its face, but it's kind of puttered out in the 60s. And that's the case with Clouzot as well, which we'll get into. But yeah, okay, things weren't great. Yeah, that's this is a man in a mud pit. What? So that's Charles Vanel. What acting? I mean, like, can you call it acting? I mean, he's like, okay, will you go in the mud pit? Sure. Will you stay there for however many takes? I hope it wasn't many takes. I don't know, but it still is tough to watch. I see, Jill, on your background, the same sequence is Rain. I'm sure we'll talk about that actor. I'm sure he appreciated that. Yeah, no, really, they sucked. So some bad shit happens in this movie. So this is an explosion, and there is the truck falling down the cliff at the very end. Finn, end of the movie. So but a little bit of context on film in 1953. So this was before the New Wave in France. And so directors, as probably a lot of you know, after the war, all these American films just hit France and fell in love. So there's a lot of noir, and I think you can see the noir influence. A lot of Japanese and Italian films. So I'd say with Wages of Fear, especially the first hour, or really all of it actually, I would say huge Italian neorealism influence. Oh, I said pre-New Wave twice. So yes, definitely pre-New Wave. So Rossellini's War Trilogy, of course, this is not a war film. It's a post-war film, but it does capture some of or you could see some of that black and white photography from that film. Shoeshine is Decika, and it's a coming of age story. We did not include it in our coming of age journey for a reason. It's and I won't share that reason. I'll just say that Italian films, especially from this period, are very sad. And on that note, Bicycle Thieves. La Terra Trema is a Visconti film from 48, early Visconti, and an early neorealism. So I don't know how many people here know it, but I actually on this watch kind of drew a parallel to this. So I was pleased, not pleased, but I was not surprised to find this in the readings. La Terra Trema is about like a fish manufacturer's locality, and it's a neorealist picture, and it is kind of existential, like Wages of Fear shows the struggles of the people working in this town. So I thought it was very similar. If you haven't seen La Terra Trema, I would recommend it. It's probably on Criterion Channel. Uh, and then there's this guy, Francois Truffaut. And by the way, I highlighted his quote about the homosexual relationship. That's a take that's interesting, and I'm curious if that'll come about in the conversation. I don't know that I see that, but you can read a film in a lot of ways. But anyway, so the one thing about Clouzot is well, not the one thing, but the thing about the new wave in Clouzot is they were really unfavorable about the old filmmakers, the old guard, and so they really liked fresh new material. And so Truffaut was one of many. There's also, if you know Andre Bazin, who's basically the founder of the French New Wave, Rivette as well, Jacques Rivette. They wrote article after article in Cahiers du Cinéma about these old filmmakers, including Clouzot and many others, and they mostly hated them. And so this is this article by Truffaut, A Certain Tendency, is a very important film of or important article or piece of literature in film history. I'd say just period, whether you agree with it or not. I actually don't agree with a lot of it because it's basically like a manifesto talking about what sucked and what does not suck. And it ushered in, of course, the new wave, including Truffaut making his own films. Ironically, he would make a lot of films that he was critical of, or in the styles that he was critical of. So, yeah, very different critic than filmmaker. I do recommend reading it, though. It is a well-written article, even if you don't agree with the argument. So, but yeah, as the year 1950, this is just an excerpt, and I have another slide for this. But as the year 1953 comes to a close, if he had to draw up a list of the audacities of the French cinema, he would not be able to include, well, I'm actually going to skip the other two references because they're not part of this, but he talked about the homosexual relationship between the characters and the Wages of Fear. So that's what he called an audacity. And then continuing, his preference would go to Monsieur Hulot's way of walking, the maid soliloquies in Rue de l'Estrapade, which is Francois steps out, the mise en scène of La Crosse d'Or. I don't know that one. Direction of actors in Madame Deux, which is The Earrings of Madame Deux by Max Ophuls, and also Gantz's experiments with polyvision. Now that's interesting because Gantz, I think he's referring to Napoleon, which was made a few decades prior. But he said, you will realize that these audacities are the work of men of the cinema, not scriptwriters or directors, not men of letters. So he was really big on originality, really, and creativity and vibrancy. So you can get why he might like a filmmaker like Tati. But they did not like the adaptations. So I just mentioned Raymond Bernard and Les Miserables. I'm sure he hated Les Miserables. There are a lot of old French films that they all hated. They liked Renoir. I'm trying to think of who else they liked. I think they liked they hated Allegret, but yeah, they they liked a couple and mostly hated. Oh, they liked Melville, and they tolerated him throughout his career, which of course, as you know, flourished. So then there's some other things about Wages of Fear. So I one thing I found interesting in this viewing is that it really is kind of resembles Casablanca in a way, it's a little more than a decade beyond it. But you could see Mario and Joe as sort of a parallel existential Rick from Casablanca. Of course, in Casablanca, even though they were basically in a purgatory, Rick, kind of had his run of the place. Even though he was had conflicts. He was, fine. He had money, for example, did not driving a truck across the country with hydroglycerin was not on the agenda for him. So yeah, and I think both Joe and Mario sort of embody what Rick was, but really just a different, a much darker character. But yeah, I could see that like the first hour of the exposition, especially as kind of a purgatory, like Casablanca. Just no Ingrid Bergman. Sorry, Vera Clouzot, not even you. But there's also anti-American imperialism. So actually, I'll share the first cut. Well, the film was cut by about, I want to say 15, 20 minutes for American audiences. And they removed some of the, probably some of those shots I referenced previously about Vera Clouzot, more of the scandalous, sexualized. They removed a lot of the imperialism or really anything American, anti-American. And you could argue whether it was trying to be accurate or anti-American. I didn't really. I think the way, at least to me, it was portrayed was this is just the way things are. Americans are into oil. I'm not going to debate that for then or now, really. But yeah, this was Standard Oil Company, and the Americans were the catalyst for really this project. Just a little more. So Pauline Kael is a interesting critic. If you haven't read her, I think she's amazing as a writer, especially. Sometimes I question her takes, but that's okay. I think she has a way with words. So I just captured two slides of her. It's actually a pretty brief review. But I just like the way she summarizes it. So, an existential thriller, the most original and shocking French melodrama of the 50s. The opening sequence shows us a verminous South American village and the Europeans trapped in it. Verminous. I love that word. They will risk everything for the money to get out. An oil well 300 miles away has caught fire, and the oil company, offers four of them 2,000 each to drive two trucks loaded with nitroglycerin over primitive roads. She names the four, and and the film is about the response to this grueling test of driving the trucks. When you can be blown up in any moment, only a fool believes that character determines fate. In this situation, courage and caution are almost irrelevant, and ordinary human responses are futile and archaic, yet nothing else is left. If this isn't a parable of man's position in the modern world, it's at least an illustration of it. This is his most controversial film. It's also his most powerful. The violence is not used simply for excitement. It's used, as in Einstein's and Buñuel's films, to force a vision of human experience. A vision of human experience. And if you don't know existentialism, that big philosophy actually came out of France. In fact, I was looking for Jean-Paul Sartre and or Camus or somebody to comment on this film. I'm sure they'd seen it. I'm curious what they think, but I couldn't find anything. So yeah, she loved the film, gave it a rave, and I think those are futile and archaic human responses. She really does have a way of turning a phrase. Um, this I'm not going to read. This is Hitchcock's on suspense redux. So this is the part where he says the bomb is about to explode, and people know that there's a bomb, but the characters don't know there's a bomb. So this here is different. So the characters do know that there's a bomb, and in fact, they're explosives. The word is in English on the truck. There's always there's no MacGuffins here. The truck is literally combustible, could combust at any moment, and as we saw in The Things Weren't Great, it does. It does. You're within a lighter click of your own demise. So I'm curious. We'll see in the discussion what you all think. Does that continual reminder, knowing it's there, does that increase the suspense? Does that make it more palpable, more intense? I don't know. I think it does, but others might disagree. Maybe a little subtlety might help the film. And that ending. So Jill said, "I'm going to hell for this." Let the GIF replay. That's Toonces, the driving cat. Um, so yeah, Montand, Mario. He is driving. He's as we say, spiking the football when he's driving. He's loosey goosey. He's like, okay, there's no. So, and of course, was this going to have a happy ending for anybody? We thought maybe, we were hopeful for Vera Clouzot. I forget her character off the top of my head, but no, she's happy, and that crosscut footage is pretty sad, pretty tragic because her love just drives off the road. Sorry, Toonces. Sorry, everybody, for traumatizing you. Then there's Super Mario Brothers. Yeah, no, there are two characters named Mario and Luigi, and they are in vehicles. So I did think of Mario Kart, and I actually looked it up to see whether there is actual whether this was a coincidence or if this was an origin of these two crazy cats. I don't know. Maybe Mario Kart borrowed a little bit, but because they do throw a lot of stuff at each other. But no, Super Mario Brothers has nothing to do with those. Mario and Luigi are pretty popular Italian names. So that is it. Really eager to hear what you all think. Let's get, oh wow, there's 90 chat. I don't know. Let's see. So we have, sorry,
I think Caitlin's up
Caitlin's
first.
first. Yeah.
So I had not seen this before. And I was pretty nervous, although I did kind of like try to like psych myself down a little bit and underestimate it and say, like, it's European. How bad could it be? I was very wrong. I offered my husband to watch this with me because he likes suspense and horror films, and he said, absolutely not. You're on your own. Good luck. And I think for me, as a viewer in 2024, the suspense came from the knowledge that this was not a Hollywood film. That, I kind of clocked that like Luigi and Bimba's truck was gonna go. Like they were not, I knew they were not going to make it to the end of the film. But as far as Joe and Mario, this is a French film. For all I knew, the truck was just going to explode and Fiend was going to come on the screen. So that that is what I was like thinking of the entire time. I was terrified. I had an emotional support pillow to get me through it. I really did. I also liked the first hour of building up the desperation of the poverty that these folks are in and the way that the American Oil Company is taking advantage of the local workers. I thought that was all really, really good political stuff. I also want to say that I do agree with Truffaut. There was, I put in my notes, a homo-romantic relationship between Mario and Joe. Like the way that when they first meet, Mario is just obsessed with him and turning down a standing date with his girl where he could get laid to instead be like, no, I gotta keep hanging out with this guy. He's amazing. And he's also from Paris. I love him. I have to spend all of my time with him. Go away. Even though you look amazing in that dress. No, I don't want it. I want this guy. And I also really enjoyed the way that the relationship dynamics kind of flipped once they got into the truck. Before the job, it's all Mario following Joe around and wanting to know everything about Joe. And Joe is the bombast of the two of them. He's starting fights in a bar because most people in a bar want to listen to music, but he doesn't want to. And then once they get into the truck and they start driving, it's Mario who's like the one who's taking on a more domineering role, and Joe is very cowardly. And I just kind of clocked that like Clouzot does seem really interested in relationship dynamics, and kind of seems like there's this idea that like, how do two people in a relationship find equal footing? It seems like maybe he thinks it's really, really hard and almost unnatural for people to have kind of dynamic parity in a relationship. So that was honestly my favorite part was watching the relationship between the two of them and the way it changed throughout the film. The oil scene was brutal. I was yelling. My family was concerned. This was great, and I'll never watch it again.
I've watched it 3 or 4 times, I think, and I actually just added it to my
No.
my list of favorite movies. Great point about the
Add
dichotomy
that
of
full
the
quote to the back of the Blu-ray. It was great. I'll never watch it again. Sorry, Aaron. I didn't mean to
Oh, it's okay.
interrupt you.
So I wasn't sure if I was muted, but Caitlin, to your point, there is a matching sequence. If you remember when I don't know why I'm forgetting the character name, but when Vera chases after the truck, and
Mhm.
then later Joe chases after the truck, and there is
Mhm.
kind of a cat and mouse. Okay, leave me, and of course then he runs over him in the oil. So I don't know. I don't know if
Brutal.
that's
Awful. That was
love
like the
hurts.
ultimate Dom moment for their relationship. It was awful.
Well, it seems like it brought them together because that was before the scene of them hugging. So yeah,
Yeah.
and sometimes yeah, trauma connects. So anyway, Josh, curious what you have to say.
Yeah, this is my second time watching it, and I
Linda.
think I underappreciated it my first time, and watching it this time, I just love this film. I think this film is a masterpiece, and it makes me want to revisit some of the other Clouzot films that I appreciated but didn't love quite as much. I really want to go back and rewatch Le Corbeau, especially. Um, but yeah, this is just, I think it's a perfect film. I think that opening sequence of the showing the poverty, showing that sense of entrapment. The I love the development of the characters that we do meet. I think it's exactly what we need for this film. The developing the relationship between Mario and Luigi, and the friction that comes when Joe comes into the picture. It becomes heartbreaking then when Luigi dies, because I do think that Luigi becomes this character that we really care about by the end, even though we know that he is the one that's marked for death. But we also, I also appreciate the fact that these men that are going on this trip, none of them are particularly good characters. We see how masculinity is played out in this situation. We see the ways that even Luigi, this character that we like, we see how he is just strutting around as well and willing to pick a fight. We see Joe coming in and domineering. We see Mario and the way that he treats Vera. We see all of the ways that desperation especially creates these uh, creates this toxicity within this community. And so yeah, I think it's a fascinating character study in those ways, so that to me this is just really rich. And so that when they go to their dooms, it's sad, but it's also, it feels fated at the same time. It feels like they have chosen to go down this path. And yeah, I just think this is riveting. Each of the sequences, whether it's the backing up to turn around on those winding switchbacks, they're just nail biting, and they're just as intense as the first time I saw it. Yeah, I love this film, and that moment at the end when Mario is just, even though I know it's coming, and he is just taunting fate one last time, is it's just throwing a middle finger up uh, to just basically say, I can do whatever I want. I'm home free. And it's again incredibly. I didn't necessarily find it sad. I found it sad for maybe Vera and the rest of the town, but I feel like he got what he deserved by the end of the film as well.
He was tempting God, and God was like, "Not so fast." Literally, not so fast. Yeah. You mentioned Le Corbeau, which I actually rewatched this week. I love that film. So that was an early resistance film. We talked about it a little bit last week. I wanted to point out that Truffaut actually watched that as a kid like 1,000 times. It was like one of his favorite films, and then he eventually grew into hating Clouzot. But I think he always loved Le Corbeau, and it's a very, very bitter film. Not that this isn't, but yeah. Also, in the chat, people are talking about this being a dude movie. And there is a remake that I thought about watching it, but no, I just
No,
can't
no,
stomach it.
man.
But there is a female character, and I'm not to steal your thunder, Jill, but when I was reading about Sorcerer, Frankenheimer said he couldn't cast a woman in the part. So yeah, I think it is dudes being dudes, but it's also the perception of 53 and 77 that dudes drive trucks. And it's the perception among those people in those towns as well. So they did not take applicants from any females. So Lewis, you're next.
Yeah, so I think on these rewatches, I mostly thought about the films in context with each other and as, comparing the two instead of more like standalone. So I'll probably save like a few comments for the Sorcerer discussion. But specifically with Wages of Fear, I think for me, um, I actually on this time because I had the opportunity, so I watched Sorcerer first and then watch Wages of Fear. And Sorcerer went up in my estimation so much on this rewatch. I was like, surely I'm going to be let down by Wages of Fear, which I already knew was an all-time fave and I loved. And then that just didn't happen at all. That's one of the things that was so amazing to me is that, 25 years earlier, Clouzot was able to do something, ultra modern and, from a technical standpoint as well, able to achieve like great suspense set pieces. No, does he get something to the level of the bridge sequence in Sorcerer? No, but the other sequences, like the particularly like the just the particular shots in the he know where to put the camera like in the sequence with the reversing and then the shot the three key shots the such a cool shot when Yves Montand jumps down onto the like off of the platform onto the ground and the camera's down there looking at him and it kind of like shakes and the sand goes into the camera. It's really cool. And then the shot of the wire breaking off and coming back to the camera and then the collapse is like really, really believable. I'm really curious how they made that happen. That was really well done, and seemed like legitimately terrifying. It didn't seem like silly. Like, you could tell it was a model or something. You could tell it actually happened. So, but anyway, as far as more like comparisons between the two, I guess I'll hold future comments till later.
Sorry, I'm laughing because Rodney made a comment about Sin Journey's relay race explosives trucks, and he said he'd ride with Jill. So I'm just gonna give a little comment to that. I'm an excellent driver. Jill's ridden with me. Jill is a good driver too.
You've ridden with me. I think I'm a great driver.
All right, touche. All right, Joe.
All right. Yeah, I don't have too much more to add, but this is my second viewing. I hadn't seen it in a while, actually. It's been a fair amount of time since I first saw it. I remember like loving it and being really impressed by it the first time, and I think I was just even more impressed on this rewatch. I feel like this movie and Sorcerer are both kind of like feats of filmmaking. I think that like they're master classes in how to use filmmaking techniques to build suspense. They really are. So I was really sort of impressed by that. But there is also like Josh mentioned and a lot of stuff going on, right? There's a lot of stuff under the surface here. A lot of stuff about masculinity and about exploitation. It definitely like raises the stakes, and I love the fact that like the characters aren't necessarily likable. I mean, but they kind of have to be. in order for this movie to explore sort of what it's exploring about desperation. And I think what's interesting about watching the movie is I think it was Christina posted on like the Discord. It was from like the Blu-ray extra, right? Describing the movie as like sort of the most strangely satisfying feel bad movie. And I feel like that's a good description. It's like I always try to figure out like what it is about it that makes it sort of like satisfying and not just like a total downer. And I was actually I was also thinking about there's a Criterion essay by Dennis Lehane on the film, and I think I have it written. Yeah. So he says that a film in which one character dies saying there's nothing is bound to be attacked for being both misanthropic and atheistic, but I've never felt that Clouzot was saying this is the world, but rather this is the world we've made. And I think that's a good insight into like why it feels that way. I think, and a big reason why that works is sort of what it's saying about desperation and about exploitation, and a lot of the stuff set up in like the first hour or so. But I thought this was a really thrilling watch. Like we've said in general, great suspense films are still suspenseful even when you know what's going to happen. I think this was definitely the case with this and Sorcerer.
Yeah, I was actually almost going to cite that essay, but I always cite Criterion essays. Wanted to give them a break, but yeah, also contrast the Casablanca versus Wages, you know, during the war and then post-war, and then Sorcerer post another war. They really do kind of reflect the realities, the exploitative and the geographical realities of the time. So yeah, great observations. And Rodney is next. Did you? Oh, sorry, Rodney's next. Sorry. I was thinking about your chat.
Yeah, so this was a first time watch for me as well. And I think I had tried to watch it before and I just couldn't get through that first like 15, 20 minutes. But now watching it this time, those 15, 20 minutes, half an hour is so vital to the picture. And it just lets those characters breathe. We get to know a lot about them with Luigi, and he has like cement in his lungs. Later on, you learn about Bimba and how he came from a work camp, German work camp. So even with the minor characters that don't have as much screen time, they give a lot of background to those characters to make them relatable, to give them kind of another layer. So I think that first part of the film is so important to the rest of the film and how it sets up all those tense moments. I also really love the lighting that they use when they're in the hills. It seemed like he really used a bright light to really show that kind of scalding heat, and how they're sweating and just trying to especially when they're trying to explode the rock, and that kind of sequence. Also, the oil scene just was unbelievable. Like it was hard to even watch. And it's whenever a movie from, you know, the 50s or 40s that gets you to that point, you know, it's just masterful, because it's so like you just watch Joe's legs and it gives you this you know, sickening sensation. I also love what he did with tension in the sense of it showed actual tension, like ropes breaking or like wires breaking to really show what the tension was doing. And I thought that was really a masterful way as well. What a gut punch at the end too, with him just driving off the cliff. I mean, this is just balls to the wall. You just don't see movies like this. And I absolutely loved it.
And you really didn't too much at the time. And by the way, that I'm trying to show behind me, Joe, is that what your lover's about to do to you? But that is actual oil. So in fact, both Montand and Vanel both were injured from the oil. So I imagine Vanel maybe
Okay,
just
that
a tad
answers
more.
Lewis's question.
Yeah. But no, it is very, very intense. And yeah. So anyway, Christian's next. Christian,
Yeah,
and
I
then
mean,
Christina, and then we'll get to Jill.
great. Yeah, unsurprising that Clouzot put his actors through that, for sure. But I think this movie, like, I feel like the audience reaction to this feels almost as unstable as that nitroglycerin. Like you feel like throughout this whole movie, and this is my third time, and I think the first time I saw it, I rated it high, but not my highest rating. But after my second watch, I promoted it. It just kind of really hit me how perfect this movie is. And I think I'll just kind of touch on some of my favorite things about it. Really is the character development, starting. I know we've talked about that first hour, so it feels. I didn't realize it was an hour. It's actually a full on hour, really, before you really get started in on the suspense track. So I think in some ways that separates it, and we'll talk about Sorcerer, and sort of separates it and makes it a different experience, in my opinion. I feel like I know these characters, and I also don't know them at the same time. And I think the big thing here is, do you really know about yourself until you're faced with adversity and you're faced up against it, right? And also just that, the sort of willingness to sacrifice, your fellow man just for that there was no stopping this group for getting, a lot of it was driven by their circumstances and all that stuff. And even though they were all flawed people, they all had some redeeming qualities. I think even Joe, to me, is his journey and his sort of about face. I actually felt sympathy for him at the end. It's crazy, even though he was a total dickhead, and he came in firing, and that whole, and I feel like one thing that I felt on this rewatch was Mario's like palpable sort of disappointment in what Joe ultimately was. Like, seeing him for what he was, I think that hurt him, because he idolized him, like someone mentioned. He thought this guy was, man, this guy's hot shit. He's got a reputation. He's a badass. He's a cool character, and he's the kind of person that brought some life to the place, some spice, as he said, when he justified slapping Luigi. But at the same time, that role reversal was really fascinating, and obviously the tension that this is one of the great sort of pot boy. It has a sort of the pot boiler thriller, but it also is philosophical. It's a critique of greed and capitalism, all that good stuff. And it's not just a critique of the U.S.; it's a critique of just world greed. You know what I mean? We're not the only ones doing that. A lot of the developed world just does this. They invade countries. I think showing people of color in the mix there, it is a real sort of statement too about, we really usually go to places like that too to exploit the most. And all that is there. And then it also works as a pure thriller, as a pure sort of testosterone ride. It works as a French, a precursor to the new wave, Italian neorealism, all of that. And that's my favorite thing about this movie, is that it actually feels like two different movies, but it melts together beautifully. And I think the character development, I'll come back to it, is what pays off this movie. I think it elevates it even more. Because if you just take the suspense scenes in a vacuum, that's incredible filmmaking of the highest order. But then you have all these dynamics happening, and the way the cinematography really just brings you in. Like, I feel the freaking heat rising off the ground. I feel like the freaking sand burning my toes. Like, it's so hot and oppressive. And it's not just the heat, but what's being done to the people. So I think ultimately this is a masterpiece. I already felt that way after my second watch, but now it just continues to get better. And it's really, it still feels modern. It really hasn't aged that much, to be honest.
Yeah, and great point about the globalism, and especially France too. France was no stranger to colonialism and imperialism. And in fact, I think the Battle of Algiers was certainly influenced by this, along with many other films. So yeah, great point. And yeah, pot boiler. I like, basically that pot is boiling the entire time. So let's see Christina, and then we'll close out with Jill.
There we go. A lot of people have already said a bunch of themes and things that I was thinking about, so I'll just add a couple other things. And I can't remember exactly if I got this from the Lehane essay or some other ones that I'm reading, but like the key word that everybody said before me was desperation, and how it creates this toxic atmosphere, and it forces these people who have hardly any options to begin with, and they turn away from what little they have, which to me was Vera Clouzot's character. She represents that there is something there positive, but he turns away from that, like they all do, for supposedly some unattainable reward that's totally out of reach anyway. or it's either that or they're reaching for some something worthless, like the approval of someone who turns out to be a phony and a coward. So I found that really interesting. And I was really like, this was a first time watch for me. Sorcerer I had seen a bunch of times before, so I found myself comparing the differences and trying to figure out what the differences added or took away, from each one. And even though the structure is almost identical, where the first hour, now you have, before they actually get on the road, in Sorcerer, they're more telling you where they came from, where here they're showing you what their situation is and what they have in front of them. And, then what they're ignoring and walking away from and everything. And then I'll just add one more thing, that I like the image, the opening image of the cockroaches, which a lot of essayists and reviews mention that, the cockroaches and the boy and the vulture, where again, that's the same kind of action, is where there's this greater mystery power that could be fate or your own choices. Who knows? They both can be valid in this movie. Something is toying with you, like the boy with the cockroaches, and then he turns away for the ice cream, which he can't even, think of affording. And by the time he comes back, another bigger heartless power is playing with the cockroaches. So I mean, that's like the summing up the action of the whole movie with the characters. So
That's where the existential, fatalistic,
Yeah.
it's all there. So Jill, I'll let's see, make sure I'm
Yeah,
sharing.
the only thing I'm going to add about Wages of Fear, which really doesn't have anything to do with Wages of Fear, is that, yeah, y'all are right to get in my truck, because, and I wish that Chris was on this call, because maybe he's been there, but I drove the Connor Pass in Ireland, and that was a real butthole clencher, let me tell you. And I handled it like a pro. I actually did all the driving when we were in Ireland, but the Connor Pass was like the whole time you're like on the edge of a mountain, like there at the Atlantic, and then you're like, oh, this is a one-way road, and then you're like, no, it's two-way, and there's a tour bus coming, and I have an option to either pull into the cliff and die, or pull off and like Tensis fall down the side of a mountain. Anyways, so yeah, Wages of Fear is an absolute masterpiece, and really, and I had seen it before, actually wrote about it for Filmstruck many years ago, and I will actually, I'm going to republish that post on our website, probably put that up tomorrow. But I will say that people who know me know that I have a love of like real dude movies. And I especially love like dude movies in the 70s, which is why I'm taking Sorcerer on this call. And I also have a thing for truck drivers. So this shit's checking a lot of boxes for me. And I've actually been told that I would make a very good truck driver. So I just feel like, and then I love like guys who drive fast cars with, trucks involved. So basically Smokey and the Bandit, which I
Burt
feel like we
Reynolds.
could have made this we could have made this like a triple feature here. But anyway, so I do like every bit of this checks boxes. And Sorcerer, there's a lot of good stuff here. A lot of stuff about Friedkin, God rest his soul, that we will be discussing. So we've got Roy Scheider here. God love him. He's the face of the 70s. I mean, you can smell the sweat and the polyester and the cigs. So you got Hurricane Billy Friedkin here. You all know what he directed. And I'm just gonna read this quote. The thing about Billy Friedkin is that he was very opinionated. He was difficult. direct, but the man was principled. He had integrity. And in his younger career, when he was younger, early in his career, he had an ego problem. And he completely, in his older age, had enough realization to say, yeah, I was kind of an asshole. And he definitely had an approach on set that, which you'll see in a little bit, that now he would definitely get called out and for abusive practices on set. Now that's not how he was all the time, but he did employ tactics that today would definitely get him in trouble with all of the unions. But the one thing about Friedkin is that he was not educated in film. So he says here, it all comes down to fate. There's no real reason I ever should have become a film director. I never studied film. Unlike the movie brats of my generation, I never went to film school or even to college. I was never that enamored of film. I saw movies, but I viewed them as entertainment. I was motivated to want to get into live TV, which was a new medium when I was of age in the middle 50s. So I took an entry-level job and it just grew from there. It's the equivalent of independent film today. But why did I get the breaks that I got? I couldn't tell you. That's the mystery of fate. And to me, that's what Sorcerer is about. And I just think that quote probably sums him up better than any other. We've got Roy Scheider. This is coming off of Jaws. And actually, Billy Friedkin's been asked extensively about working with Scheider again, because he worked with him on The French Connection. Jaws happens. He works with him on Sorcerer, and Scheider had changed since his success with Jaws. And so there was a little bit of difficulty, but ultimately they made it work. But seriously, Roy Scheider was the man of the time. And I think one of the most fascinating actors ever. And then we have Bruno Kramer as Victor Manzon, and French actor. I think he's so terrific in this. And we have is Paris Burning, The Stranger, White Wedding, Under the Sand. And, not as, we'll get into who was originally going to be in this film, not as popular, but I think I think it actually works quite well. And it's one of those things that I think the star power of who Friedkin was going to pull in may have done better for the film financially, but I think it would have been a disservice overall to the story.
And Jill, Maigret is Georges Simenon. What's interesting is I would think he would have been much bigger a star. But even in these movies listed here, he's kind of a minor character in a lot of them.
Right.
So yeah, but he's great. I agree.
So next one, then we have Francisco Rabal as Nilo, and there's a really funny story about this, which I think is in the next slide.
It is.
But he was a Spanish actor, and he worked with Buñuel, and probably the most famous besides Scheider in this film. But the next slide is. And I'm so glad because Aaron threw this in there, and I was like, this is one of my absolute favorite anecdotes, Friedkin anecdotes, and there's so many. But he wanted to cast Rabal in French Connection, and he was like, oh, I love that Spanish actor. And so they get Fernando Rey. And then he was like, wait, that's not him. And then it turned out that Rabal didn't speak English or French or anything, so they decided to keep Ray. And then Friedkin finally got to work with him with Rabal. But I just love that they got him, and he's like, wait a minute, I don't think that's him. All right, then we've got.
And I can just imagine he did not say, get that Spanish guy. It was probably a little more colorful than that.
Get that fucking Spanish guy.
Get that fucking Spanish guy.
Yeah. And then this is Amadou, I guess. He was a Moroccan French actor. Not hugely popular, but he was the one in the original casting that remained. The other three, which we'll get to, fell off due to various things. So, but not a long filmography of very famous films. Although I do have a soft spot for Ronan there. Frankenheimer's, I think that was his last film. So, right, next one. Okay, so this is from a blog post. And it says, Sorcerer has so many riffs and connections to other movies, it could almost be read as a gateway to understanding what 70s cinema is all about. The film is obviously linked to an earlier adaptation of the source novel, The Wages of Fear. In terms of theme and form, the most obvious comparison is with the work of Werner Herzog, and with Wrath of God and Fitzcarraldo, which, okay. But this is definitely, I think, Sorcerer is pretty much encapsulates what the 70s were in cinema. The opening scenes bear resemblance to a myriad of films, including Costa Gavras' Z, Pontecorvo's The Battle of Algiers, along with Friedkin's earlier work, The French Connection and The Exorcist. The aerial shots of the lush green South American forest, decimated by explosions and fire, are incredibly similar to Apocalypse Now, and the fluid mobility of the camera, often moving in and out of exterior and interior spaces, reminded me of Antonini's The Passenger. The tone of tense, foreboding strangeness is also imbued through the metallic electronic mood of Tangerine Dream's score. God bless Tangerine Dream. And then the next on Sorcerer, and I'm not going to read all of this, but this is taken from his memoir, from Friedkin's memoir. And he would go on these talk shows, and he would be asked about, like, you know, what his favorite films were. And on one of these shows, he's just like, oh yeah, Clouzot's Wages of Fear and Diabolique. But he hadn't seen them in 20 years. And he talks about how, you know, films were not as readily available. Like, it would have to be a repertory house that was showing it. There were no, you know, VHS, DVR, DVD, none of that. So he had this kind of concept, and he collaborated with Wally Green, who had written The Wild Bunch for Sam Peckinpah. And the two of them decided to kind of make a new adaptation of The Wages of Fear, but they never viewed it as a remake. And actually, Friedkin would get pretty pissed off when people would call it a remake, because he says, no, I'm taking the structure, like the premise of the film, but really everything else was quite different. He did fly to France to speak to Clouzot, to basically get his permission, even though Clouzot did not own the rights to the story. But he just felt like it was only right for him to kind of get his blessing. And Clouzot was very, very sick. He had he was about to have surgery, and he hadn't really worked in film in quite some time. And Friedkin kind of made his case, and Clouzot didn't bless the project, but he didn't condemn it either. And then he kind of perked up when Friedkin was like, and I'll give you money, you know, from any revenue, which, as we know, there was not a lot. But at the time, you have to understand that Friedkin could do no wrong. He was essentially given a blank check because of the success of the French Connection and of The Exorcist. And when he was trying to get the funding secured for this, and his request of filming in Ecuador which he ended up compromising for the Dominican Republic. Like they were like, absolutely not, you're not doing this, we're not sending you to Ecuador, everyone's going to get killed. He basically could still make it happen, because you know, I think at the time The Exorcist had made at least $100 million, which in 1977 dollars is a shitload of money. All right, so the next oh, actually go back to that last one. One thing he said I wanted to point out is that he says the premise seemed to me a metaphor for the countries of the world. Find a way to work together or explode. My film would be wholly original characters. I would make it grittier than Clouzot's film with the documentary feel for which I had become known. So, and that he believed that he could make the audience care about these characters who were really morally shitty. And I think that what he, and actually how he painted those characters at the beginning, I think he did a really great job of kind of setting up who those characters were. Okay, now you can go to the next one. So the cast that he originally had was Steve McQueen, Marcello Mastroianni, Lino Ventura, and then Amado. And it was all set. This was what was going to happen. McQueen actually said to Friedkin, like, write this. He read the script. It's like he basically wrote that part for McQueen. And then McQueen was all in until he found out they were filming it in Ecuador. And at the time, McQueen had left his wife, Neely, and he was with Ally McGraw. And Miss Ally flares her nostrils at every close-up McGraw. And he said to Billy Friedkin, oh, just cast Ally in it. I mean, can you imagine Ally McGraw in this movie? Jesus. So, and he says, okay, well, if you don't want to cast her in it, then make her an associate producer. Because I don't want her coming down to Ecuador and having to sit down there for 3 months and not do anything. So like just put her name on it somewhere. And Friedkin said no. And then Friedkin did regret that decision for many, many years. And then he finally came around to it and was like, okay, I actually am fine with what I said to McQueen. He even tried to get Robert Mitchum to be in it, and so he like meets Robert Mitchum for like a lunchtime meeting over a bottle of vodka, and Billy Friedkin was like, I didn't even really drink, but I wanted to like show him that I was a man and I could hold my own because you got, you know, Robert Mitchum here. And Robert Mitchum said, why would I want to go to Ecuador for 2 or 3 months to fall out of a truck? I can do that outside my house. And Friedkin said, this is the best. It was vintage Mitchum and I had no answer. So it was like, okay. So, but anyways, he really did come to peace with, by 2014, when he was working on the restoration of Sorcerer and he was doing all these interviews, he was like, listen, the cast is terrific. And he says, I don't know that those 3 huge stars would have gone as far as the guys we cast, because what they did was life-threatening. McQueen was kind of a daredevil, but we did things that were really unsafe. You want to talk about a regret? That's something I regret. We were very lucky. No one was seriously hurt or killed. Very, very lucky. All right, so go to the next one. So he went and scouted Ecuador. Lou Wasserman at Universal, or at Paramount, and then also Universal, they were like, absolutely not, you're not going there. But then he just went on and he just went to Ecuador anyways. And then eventually they had to renegotiate Dominican Republic, where they ended up. But while in Ecuador, he noticed that all the long-haul cargo trucks there had names of like wives or girlfriends, mythological, religious names. And one of the trucks was Lazaro, which is Lazarus. And so he was trying to think like, okay, we're going to use Lazaro for one of the trucks, but then what are we going to do for the other? And at the time, he was listening to Miles Davis's album Sorcerer. And so they decided to name it Sorcerer, painted Sorcier on the side. And then he decided to call the film Sorcerer, which was an intentional, what he says, an intentional but ill-advised reference to The Exorcist. The original title I'd proposed was Ball Breaker, to which Lou Wasserman said, "Are you out of your mind?" And then the other thing is, this film, more than any other film that he had worked on, he had become obsessed with it. And he believed it was going to be his magnum opus, and that everything he had done prior to was for this film. Like this, he put everything, and it actually kind of destroyed him physically and mentally. All right, next one, Aaron. So things were not great. I mean, this is day one, what needs to happen during infrastructure week. Like, this bridge has got to get fixed. I went to the world premiere restoration of Sorcerer in 2014 at the TCM Film Festival. It was at the Chinese theater where the film premiered in 1977. It was the first time it had been seen. It may have been premiered in, actually, this may have been an American premiere, but regardless, it had only maybe been seen once before in public, and I think it might have been in Denmark. And they had just remodeled the Chinese, and new sound, new screen. And this scene literally killed me. And my soul left my body. The sound was so terrifying. You heard every creak, every splinter, every rope being stressed, to the point that my best friend and I were sitting next to each other, and we were both gripping the armrests and like digging into it. I was like in a cold sweat. It was horrifying and incredible at the same time. Probably one of the most intense things I've ever seen in a theater. And then to have Billy Friedkin run down the steps, rejuvenated that his film has been seen with an audience wearing those glasses and that black leather jacket. And, you know, he just was loving every minute of it. Next one. So seriously, things were really not great. Sorcerer comes out in 1977, and he goes down to the end of his driveway to pick up the LA Times and other newspapers. I think it was like Newsweek and USA Today. And all these critics that really loved his earlier work were just panning it. Charles Champlin had just eviscerated him, and that's when he knew he was fucked. So it was in the theater for about a week. Star Wars comes out, bumps it out. Sorry, I'm getting this wrong. Star Wars comes out first, then Sorcerer comes in. Star Wars was so big, it kicks Sorcerer out after a week, and it was never back in the theater. And all of those studio reps despised him. They would call him and say, you know, hey, we support you, we love you. And then they would go to the press and say something completely else. You know, they lost a shitload of money, and he basically became their punching bag. This plunged him into deep depression. He was also really sick. and originally diagnosed with the flu, but then it's going on forever. And then it turns out he had malaria. Even though he had taken all the drugs to prevent it, he still had it. Also to the left there, you'll see the image. It was a poster that was put up in theaters to basically let audiences know that don't worry, you're not going to have to read. It's not going to be in, other languages for the rest of the film. But I wanted to just say very, very quickly, and this is just kind of my own observation, is I think maybe not this film, but I do think Star Wars, and I do enjoy Star Wars. I think that marked the end of kind of that gritty realism that the decade had been known for. And I think it also shifted audiences' expectations of films. They embraced the fantasy elements. They embraced those very clear lines between good and bad. And this was a film that totally muddied the waters on what was good and what was bad. And that's not the only movie in the 70s that muddied those waters. A lot of the films made during this era had morally ambiguous characters. So I think really Star Wars, as much as I think it's a fun movie, I think it kind of fucks some shit up. So that's probably going to have a lot of people coming after me online, but that's fine. So next one, just a couple funny anecdotes that I think are really hilarious. But the scene where they have to blow up the tree, they were having trouble. The people that they had on set really didn't know how to do it. And so Billy Friedkin's like, I got to call Marvin the Torch. So he calls his friend Marvin the Torch, and Marvin the Torch was this Jewish guy from Queens. And Marvin's not his real name. And but it was a name that was given to him by a New York journalist, Jimmy Breslin. And what Marvin the Torch did is he would blow up businesses for insurance money. And and then all of the guys, they all called his wife Mrs. Torch. So Billy Friedkin gets on the phone and he calls up. Marvin the Torch's wife answers. Billy is like, hey, Mrs. Torch. She did not like that. And then he asked, can I speak to Marvin? And she explodes and is like, he doesn't do that anymore. And Billy's like, wait, this is a legit job. It's for a movie. So Marvin the Torch gets on a plane, flies down to the Dominican Republic with 2 suitcases of flammable, in quotes, beauty supplies. He blows up the tree, then he leaves. So I just love this whole, like, Friedkin, if you listen to all his commentaries and interviews, he knew a lot of interesting people. Then the restoration, which I touched on, and attending that screening, he basically saw to it. This movie was also kind of caught up in rights hell as well. But one thing about Friedkin is he's not a purist on film, meaning the medium. So he actually is a big fan of DCP, and he felt that the DCP restoration that he headed up looked as good as it did the day he shot it. And he personally did the color timing. He personally remixed the sound. He worked with Tangerine Dream. They re-recorded and they recorded additional music. And I actually have this exact release in the little booklet there, and it's fantastic. And just a couple little jokey things here, but this was me after that screening I attended. Yeah. And next one. This is me when I parallel park. I'm kind of looking out, making sure I don't hit the curb. So then we have a little video here that we are going to watch.
Thank you, Joe, for sharing this. There's a lot of great videos. We have another one after this.
I love Hitchcock.
Yeah.
Whenever I
yes.
speak at a film school, I will tell the students with the instructor there, leave the school immediately. Quit
Yes.
film school and just go watch Hitchcock's films. Not for suspense or horror, but just how to make a film. It's all there. It's a tutorial. How a film is made, you can pick up from any Hitchcock film. And, you know, they're all masterworks, and they're very simply, the effects are simply achieved. Well, to me, the great Hitchcock, well, North by Northwest, of course.
Sure.
But the great experience is Psycho.
Yeah.
Psycho will scare you today. You know, there's some films that lose their luster. They used to, let's say, terrify when they came out. Psycho has not lost that luster. It's timeless and terrifying. You know, the idea that you can check into a motel, take a shower, and get stabbed to death. Suspense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the thing that leads to true horror is suspense. And without suspense, there is no horror. Vertigo, which I also don't like. It's considered one of Hitchcock's greatest films. Some people think it's the best film ever made. I don't buy it. I think
I am with you.
tedious. But I don't believe you can learn to make a film. You can learn how to use the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
But the ability to create a film is inherent in people, or it's not.
And on that note,
I love Hitchcock.
Yeah.
On that note, Hurricane Billy Friedkin had opinions. So listen, this is a little supercut of some opinions, and we'll just let him speak.
Yeah, let people watching video. We don't know if these videos are going to be blocked, but they'll be on the audio. So here we go, and you can watch them later.
I was at the Technicolor lab, and one of the color timers said, "Hey, we're running Exorcist 2. Do you want to go in the screening room and have a look at it?" And I was over there doing something else, and I said, "Okay, sure." So I went in the screening room, and I see some guys riding on the back of a bumblebee or some fucking thing. It was unreal. And I left.
Oh, I'm like you. I have no regrets about Only God Forgives. I think it's a masterpiece, and it is. I just didn't make it very expensive.
Is there a doctor in the house? We need to get a medic in here. Is there a doctor around?
I just didn't make it.
If you think that's a masterpiece, what is Citizen Kane?
It's great, but it was an inexpensive movie, so financially.
Who gives a shit?
I was asking the question because of the end of Cruising, because what you wrote in your biography. That's a one shot kind of changed the plot, the character of Steve, played by Al Pacino, and Pacino felt dispossessed of that. He felt as he had lost the
I don't
character.
give a flying fuck into a rolling donut about what Al Pacino thinks. Is that an answer to your question, Greg?
The novel, it has been said that the film The Exorcist has taken the more exploitive elements of the novel and left out maybe some of the meatier aspects. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Who said that? First, let's talk about who said it.
Okay, it has been said in some reviews.
By who?
Film critics.
Which one?
Okay, I don't have specifics with me, but that has been said.
I've never heard that. Let's put it that way.
Do you physically attack people you work with?
There have been occasions.
You slapped people before, haven't you?
Yeah, well, a priest in The Exorcist. He was not an actor. He was a priest. And it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and we were freezing. And he had to give the last rites to his friend who had just plunged from the top of a flight of steps. And the crew was there and freezing, and we did about 25, 30 takes, and he wasn't getting it. And he couldn't reach the emotional point. And I had read that other great directors had done that. John Ford, George Stevens had done that. Whack. Yeah. And I first asked, I took him by the shoulders and I asked him if he loved me and if he trusted me. And he said, you know I do, Bill. I said, okay. And I told the cameras to get ready, and I hit him as hard as I could across the face. And I said, roll it. And he went right into the scene. The shock of it, the shock brought forth the tears, and afterwards he embraced me and thanked me.
You can't pull that car too often, though, can you?
No, I haven't done it more than 570 times. I got a call from my agent, who was Pacino's agent. So we decided to jump off of Richard Gere, and we went to Pacino to do it. It turned out that Pacino had no idea what the vibe was in that community.
Pacino was just not ready for it.
He would be walking down a street, and there'd be thousands of people opposing the film, yelling out, Pacino, you f***ing f***it, you little sucker.
I know you thrive on, conflict.
Oh, I thought it was great.
Yeah, Pacino discussed with you. I know he was uncomfortable doing some of the film. I know.
So what?
For ages, he wouldn't talk about it.
Well, that's a good thing, because he's not very eloquent.
Is there part of you that thinks that you wish that it had been Richard Gere?
Yes, of course. I don't want a bunch of schmucks who call themselves judges sitting in a fucking room saying, oh, this La Dolce Vita is not as good as Batman versus Superman. Fuck them and the horse they rode in on, and the ship that brought them over here, and the dog that walks behind them. Fuck them all.
Oh, God bless you.
What a human being.
I know we really went long on this, but I wanted to share one last thing. That everything I heard about Billy Friedkin was that he was very loyal, very kind, and actually a pretty chill dude. And my best friend Sean went to a book signing when Friedkin's memoir came out, and this is the Friedkin Connection. And let me tell you, if you don't own this book, you need to get it. It is one of the most entertaining reads ever. And also, like, he's a master of self-reflection. So, get on that. But Sean went to this signing. He's a huge Friedkin fan. And it was Mother's Day. It was May 11th, 2013. And Billy Friedkin, I'm going to paste it in the chat. But Billy Friedkin said to Sean, your mother sucks cocks in hell. Happy Mother's Day, Billy Friedkin. Love it. So on that note, let's discuss Sorcerer and anything else. So thank y'all for being patient with that lengthy little presentation. So Lewis.
Thank you for that video. It's hilarious. So I guess, I mentioned earlier me thinking about the two films in comparison, and while ultimately I think Wages of Fear works. I mean, ultimately I think Wages of Fear is the stronger film overall because of that first hour. And I think the decision to show the characters and their interactions in that first hour in the town, in the village, is more impactful for the second half of the film, as opposed to understanding where the characters are coming from and their actual past. Like, to me, that doesn't have as much impact on the second half of the film, because I think you get enough of that in Wages of Fear to kind of understand the desperation. But with that said, I'm certainly happy. While I think it's a little silly for Friedkin to say it's not a remake, because like it definitely is. But anyway, I I'm so happy he did what he did because that opening with the four different stories, I mean, and you already said it, Jill. I mean, that's just pure 70s filmmaking. It doesn't get better than that. You know, you didn't have that done, four different locations around the world. You've got the camera flying all over the place. You got tanks driving in. You've got like, helicopters. I mean, it's just so visceral and so fun. It's like you know, I don't even I can't begrudge him for it because I know I've heard him say like, ask him the question, like, oh, why did you do this? Why do you do that? And he's just like, well, because I could. And I feel like that was probably a little bit of why he decided to go this direction, because it's just freaking cool to watch on screen.
And I will say very quickly that he speaks like he was a cocky motherfucker during the filming of this because he was literally the most in demand director of the time. The Exorcist was just a massive success, and but you've got old Billy Friedkin talking about young Billy Friedkin and saying, yeah, there's some shit that they were terrible to me about, but like also I had an ego problem. So, but yeah, no, and in his, I guess in his defense, I guess he was viewing it as the source material of Wages of Fear is like a Shakespearean story, and
Yeah.
that the way, so he viewed it now, is that a little like he viewed it as him just putting on another production of it. Is that pretty like, assholey of him? Yeah, probably. But he just, I think he viewed the source materials like was so reverent about it and so reverent about Clouzot because he loved him so much that he really thought, well, this is something that could be, there could be new productions of this film in different settings with different characters forever. But yeah, no, it's a remake. I mean, that's absolutely. Rodney.
Yeah, so this was a first time watch for me as well. And I felt like the beginning, what made me love Wages even more, like just how Clouzot had brought the characters together and gave that that backstory and that character development. I thought it was a little all over the place in the beginning for me. But the second half of Sorcerer is just, I mean, white knuckle. The downpouring, the torrential rain, that bridge, that rickety bridge, and the lunatic who's sitting there like, yeah, go this way, go this way. I'm like, you couldn't pay me enough to lay down on top of this bridge while this truck.
It's not a U-Haul truck. I mean, they were like just a little bit more to the left,
It was so crazy. And I agreed, the first word that came to me was gritty. The film is a lot more grittier than I thought than Wages of Fear. After the explosion, when they're bringing all the bodies back from what happened to the local town, I thought was really effective, and it just made how these people don't care about lives, human life at all. And I also like the ending a little more than Wages of Fear in the sense that it was quieter, where he just shows a guy walk into the restaurant and you know what's going to happen, kind of Tony Soprano did. And I appreciated that rather than just, driving off a cliff at the end of Wages. So I like Wages more. I think Wages is a better film, but I think it's a shame that Sorcerer didn't get the reception that I think it deserves when it first came out, because it's definitely still a really good film.
Awesome. Joe.
Yeah, so this was also a second time seeing this. I had actually seen both of them kind of close together a while back, and then this is my second viewing. It's really interesting to compare these two because, the bones are kind of the same, but they feel pretty different. This is definitely like a lot grittier. The Tangerine Dream score, which is awesome, definitely adds like a totally different vibe. But also, I think like it ends up feeling a little bit thematically different too, right? There's definitely a lot more emphasis, I think, even more so than Wages on like fate. This feels more fatalistic, I would say, even than Wages. But in terms of just like a viewing experience, it's really something else. I mean, it's a really like tense movie, and I find myself like kind of being wowed by it on two levels. I'm like, wow, this is a crazy movie, and I'm also like, wow, it's crazy that they made this or that they did this. And like I said earlier too, I think that both this and Wages are just feats of filmmaking. I don't know if I would probably say if I had to pick like a favor of the two, I would probably put Wages maybe just like a little bit higher, probably for reasons like you guys mentioned. I think like the opening in Wages, I think works a little bit better than the vignette section, as they call it, right, in the Sorcerer thing. But I think that like it's also just a feat of filmmaking in terms of just building like tension, and it has its own sort of grittiness and style to it that makes it not just feel like a retread of Wages. So it's really fun to kind of compare them. I'm actually interested to hear too what everyone else thinks about like comparing the two, and what you thought might have worked or not worked between the two.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. Josh.
Yeah, this was interesting. This is my first time seeing it, so this was definitely a new experience. I think for me, I'll definitely want to revisit it with some more distance from Wages of Fear, because I think it was a little too close for me, and I think it was hard for me to separate out those experiences. And I want to be able to give the film its proper consideration in that. I really like the tension that he's able to wring from the those set pieces that we get, the bridge, the log, the scene with where they're confronted by the revolutionaries, the scene where the truck gets the flat tire and explodes. I think all of those sequences are so well constructed, and there's some really really compelling things there. And I think that just on so many of those levels, it's really, really incredible filmmaking. And I really appreciate, Jill, you kind of framing it within the 70s, the arc of 70s cinema. And I think taking it on that level and kind of separating it out from its predecessor is going to be helpful for me in the future. I think that it's hard to not compare the two, though, right? When you're watching them back to back for this. And for me, I appreciated the way that characters slowly revealed in Wages of Fear, rather than the vignette openings. That's a preference. It's not a hard and fast, this is better or worse, right? I think for me, it felt like it tipped its hand just a little too much in that opening. But I can see that revisiting it, maybe in a year, when I'm not watching it right after Wages of Fear, I'll appreciate it in a different way. And I think that I'll be able to take it on its own terms. And I think I'm going to enjoy it a lot more for that. Yeah, I think that there's so many interesting things going on. And again, we have these men who are really despicable people. And I think that in this one, we actually have a former, I think that one of the characters is a former SS guy, as well. And, so there are some people who are really bad people too, involved in this. And so there's some bad stuff going on in this. And I appreciate that we get to see some different aspects of what's happening in this expat community, and I think that the politics of it is a little grimier than the politics that you get in Clouzot's, which I think is very much in keeping with the time that Clouzot was making it in. So I think it's also a really interesting to track the movement in cinema of how politics are being explored too. So yeah, I just think it's interesting.
I'm glad you brought
like
that up,
yeah.
especially about the Nazi. But what's funny is Friedkin does kind of pull a page out of Hitchcock's playbook on that. Because if you think about, like, let's go to like Notorious, like those are Nazis, right? But at the end, you kind of feel sorry for Claude Rains's character. Like and maybe not fully sorry, but there is like that kind of like it definitely makes you feel something, right? And it is a little bit of pity. And so I think here with Friedkin, and maybe he didn't pull it off completely, but it was like, I'm going to give you these 4 really awful people, and I'm going to throw them in this situation, and you're going to be like, oh shit, like I kind of, this is really horrible what these people are going through. It humanizes these terrible, terrible people, right? And then I will say I saw this before I saw Wages. So different tonally, coming from like backwards, So going to Wages and being like, okay, this is a masterpiece of a film. I can see how it inspired Sorcerer, but I actually prefer the vignette up front. But I think it's just because I'm kind of fond of the 70s way of telling stories. But it's interesting. So I'm coming at it from being like, I saw this movie and I go, oh shit, I need to see Wages of Fear, right? So it's like, that's how I came to it. So I'm with you on having space. So I revisited Wages again after seeing so I've had space between all of them, and I'm able to kind of like draw the lines a little more clearly. But that's a great point. And yeah, because you're going to compare these 2 films straight up. Christian.
Yeah, so I think this is my 3rd time, and similar to you, Jill, I saw it first, and I saw it actually under the context of 70s New Hollywood, sort of as like the capstone, if you will, or sort of the tail end of 70s New Hollywood, and sort of the auteurist movement of the 70s. So seeing it in that context, with that in mind, sort of post-Vietnam, all of that, it certainly shines through in that respect. I think that I went back to Wages. As soon as I saw Sorcerer, everyone was like, you have to watch Wages. You have to watch Wages. So I eventually got to it. And of course, it's an unqualified masterpiece. I think Sorcerer, for me, just a tad under that. And it's not really to ding it much. But I'll say a few things that stood out to me on this watch. The technical mastery, I mean, the pyrotechnics, the practical effects were just incredible. Like those explosions, man. That was real shit blowing up, and it looked dangerous. I think I read that the one in Jerusalem I think someone who was too close to it got hurt. I mean, that tree, just that, wow. I mean, those were real damn explosions. That was not, some like Paramount backlot shit. You know what I mean? Like they were out there with a bunch of Mrs. Torches or Mario the Torch or whatever his name is, just freaking going to town. But I loved it. That really stood out to me. Like the tech, like it's almost kind of outstrips the themes of the movie a little bit sometimes. Like it's so technically masterful at times that it almost overshadows a little bit of what it's trying to, on the Wages side as far as the source material. Not much, but I do think that in that respect it stands out. The setting, I think, and Lewis said it in the comments too, which the chat, which I think it actually is even more of a character in this film, and that jungle, like I'm just seeing Roy Scheider just flailing with a machete at every stupid branch. Like it's literally like it's closing in on them. It's trying to swallow them alive, and it's another sort of obstacle. It's another sort of something that's out to get them, so to speak. A fate. This is sort of a randomness of nature too that you can't, you can't predict when you're out there amongst in the elements, out of your element, trying to survive. And also there was something else I was thinking, which is I actually was comparing, if I want to compare the wages, if it's a Charles Vanel character, Francisco Rabal, wasn't crazy about him as an actor, to be honest, and I think that definitely fell a little flat for me. Even his sort of death scene was a little bit, ham-fisted. I wasn't crazy about him as an actor. I think they could have used a little bit of a stronger person there. It didn't have to be a Vanel copy, but you know what I mean. I just thought it needed a good number two, and to that end, I think Bruno Kramer was great. I loved Bruno Kramer. I thought as the Frenchman, this guy, I love that each of the characters brought their own background to this mission, right? Like he negotiated better pay. He's a banking guy. The guy who did the explosives was able to fashion this crazy, practical sort of like rock drop, and then everybody brought something, and Scheider being just sort of like small time crook, he probably knew about cars. So that whole like silent movie montage of them putting together the trucks is just badass shit. That is so freaking badass. And then culminating in that shot, right, of just turning on the lights, just such an iconic moment in the movie. That's very Michael Mannish as far as people who know their shit, just showing you that they know their shit and being expert at what they know. And that's really, to me, some of the stuff that really shines in this movie, and sort of sets it apart. And the details were sweated, no pun intended. He sweated all the details, right? I mean, it really was, and almost to the point of probably driving people crazy, I'm sure. And it looked like these people were really suffering out there. I think the on location shooting in the DR, all that stuff, just gave it such a feel of oppression and all of this sort of this desperation out there. So yeah, and I always wonder what you guys think. I have one question that I think I posed it a while back in another class, but the scene where he's in that incredible New Mexico cavern scene right near the end, it does feel like it turns a little bit surreal at that point, right? So it's not all. I mean, is that really? Did everybody get that impression that it was surreal, or he was just embracing sort of his own madness, so to speak? I think some of that didn't even feel like it was real. That's all I would say on that. So
yeah, I love the ambiguity of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went long on that. Sorry.
Oh, it's fine. Christina, Lewis, before I go to you, Christina, you had your hand up. Did you decide no? Or
everybody has said everything so beautifully that I was thinking of saying similar things anyway, so it's okay.
Okay. All right. Lewis.
Sorry, I forgot to say earlier. I just wanted to add, all who panned this in '77, shame on them. I mean, obviously it's not a perfect film. There's things that can be discussed, but to pan this, I mean, I don't know what more you want from a film, truly. And I mean, they belong in like critics jail for that, like ultimate bad take. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, it was, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of blame gets put on Star Wars. It's not the film's fault. It's not George Lucas's fault. But I do think it's indicative of the time, and that maybe audiences were tired of seeing, this. And it was good to kind of get a little bit of an escape. But shame on the critics are supposed to not be the audiences. They are supposed to evaluate the film on its merits. And again, this is not a perfect film, and I honestly don't think it's fair to view it straight up as a remake of Wages, because there are so many differences to it. And I think it is hard to compare the two, because I think tonally they are so different. But I I think, and I kind of compare it to like the musical remake of oh gosh, of The Shop Around the Corner, you know, the Judy Garland musical. It's like it's it's not a bad it's not bad, it's different, right? It's just a different imagining of it. So I'm really glad that I'm glad we had some new people to this film. I think it's terrific. Yes, we need a 4K. I'm sad Billy Friedkin's not alive to oversee that. We actually probably need to have this be in a better release than what the studio release we got, although the booklet release was really nice. But yeah, again, get the Friedkin Connection book. It really is a great read. And I just love that cranky ass motherfucker. So, Aaron, did you have anything you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, just to close out and summarize, thanks everybody for great discussion. Yeah, it is really tough to compare these films. And Josh, great observation about, having some distance between these. This having seen both before, I think it's a little easier to watch them back to back. Actually, I think it helps, but first time I could see how that'd be a big challenge. I also just want to say that really it seems like people are more just like Friedkin said, it's kind of futile to compare movies, but it sounds like people lean more Wages than Sorcerer. What I'll say that I feel like Sorcerer is more of a product of its film time. So you see a lot of 70s in there. You see a lot of like Coppola, Taxi, well, Scorsese, although Taxi Driver, I don't think it'd come out yet. But and also, like I said, Cassagraves and all the other influences. And then of course with Wages, I think it was actually ahead of its time. So yeah, Truffaut trashed it, but there was really not much like it at the time. So I think that I think that both are groundbreaking. One was actually both were kind of disappointing commercially. I don't, because Clouzot, he got trashed by the critics, only made 3 films afterwards. So yeah, I'm glad that they found new audiences. I'm glad that Clouzot has a better reputation than he did now. And Friedkin, he kind of also fell off, and I like that his early works are more celebrated, not just for The Exorcist and The French Connection. Some of these other works. Tula and Die in L.A. I saw did well in our poll,
I
our
love
music
it.
thing. I do too.
I
Yeah.
love it.
So
And that one was also critically reviled.
conversation.
And those people need to like fucking get a life because that movie's badass.
Yeah,
Wang
and
Chung.
yeah.
Dude, Billy Friedkin loved Wang Chung. And he's like, listen, everybody have fun tonight. Everybody Wang Chung tonight. You are going to do the entire soundtrack. Like, that is just a baller move.
Oh yeah, and I was checking posts to see if you had that post going. So I'm guessing we'll get that up soon. But yeah, so we have the pieces here, the Freaking Connection that Jill mentioned. Well, I guess we don't have Toonses and Super Mario Brothers, but they're there. So yeah, thanks for hanging in there. This was a long one. It's going to go public, as I mentioned, public on the feed, not an IPO or anything. So yeah, we have not been saying suspect temper as much, but I don't think we can say it. But next week we're gonna try something different with Peeping Tom and Frenzy. So hopefully it'll be cool. And we have an award season coming up. We also have a J horror themed T-shirt coming out soon. Award season is already ready. We just have to put it online. So that's going to be free for really January through March. And yeah, so you don't really have to sign up, but you can if you want the emails. So that was it. Thanks so much.